I'm ready. Hey, everybody. For the second time, we started the video, y'all. We was in only me, so it wasn't public, and I'm just talking, and I'm like, why I can't see my video? And we didn't change the setting. It's a production that goes into this, y'all. It's I have to give my daughter a shout out, Haviland, who helps me with this weekly. She sets the lighting up, she does the testing with me, and she's just the bomb. So thank her. How are you guys doing this Wednesday? I hope everybody's okay. If you see me looking down, it's probably because, well, it's not probably. I'm looking at my laptop so that I can, communicate with you all as it comes together. It's saying that my video ended. Don't know why. Don't know what's going on. Just having one of those days, y'all. We're gonna get it together. Hey, there you go. There's my video. Well, it's not probably. I'm looking at my laptop so that I can, There you go. How about that for some technical difficulties today? You gotta laugh that stuff off. So anyway, it's so that if I see your, hey Andre, if I see you come up, I can make sure I can address you or listen to your question. So today, I wanted to talk about something I've been reading a lot about, at least on social media, and I think there's a growing number of people who have some concerns, especially with the number of killings that took place over like the weekend, and in general. And like it just didn't start this weekend, but because we're in the time where we're addressing police brutality and the violence, state violence against communities of color, specifically Black communities, and those state violence, meaning officers or law enforcement that go without impunity. And so you've had people who have brought up the issue of Black on Black crime. What's up, Dennis? And that's not a term that I particularly care for, but I understand that there's some people who overwhelmingly feel that there is a need to really address that, and feel that, by people having an uproar and people feeling very adamant at this particular point as it relates to a movement to address, state violence or police brutality or excessive force, people who are unarmed who are killed. You have people in communities of color who have had loved ones and family members taken too soon by violence within their own community or by someone who is in proximity. And I thought it was important to bring this up because I kind of touched on it in another video before where I talked about how, I think we've all heard the term the narrative and understand from a proximity standpoint and how, people are going to commit crimes within people within their own proximity. And I think that when we say that, it doesn't take away from the fact that somebody lost their loved one due to violence and it was somebody that was close to them. And I think some people who have experienced that loss, and I have been one of them who has, experienced a loss of somebody close to me within my community, which is an uncle of mine. And those people tend to feel like you need to get that taken care of first before we can really get into this issue of, expecting everybody else to respect our lives if we don't even do it within our own communities. And I think that's basically been some of the issues that we've had some people experience. And I think that I don't ever want to be the person that dismisses what somebody is saying. I think it's equally important to respect the fact that these people have lost someone, and they feel very strongly that where there's potential, where there's a lot of focus and attention on state violence and police brutality, that their loved ones aren't necessarily getting the same type of notoriety, attention, and the same feeling to solve that crime and to also bring about justice for their loved one, and also, some level of support for them to be able to get some type of closure, be it through, just being able to identify who it was that took away their loved one's life, or some type of justice of something. And I think that perhaps there's an understanding, or at least not an understanding, but at least there is the idea that nobody cares about their inner community violence, and that we're more focused on police violence and not so much focused on the violence in our communities. And I do believe that there are people out there who are in many communities, and I've traveled quite a bit and seen a lot of freedom fighters and just other organizations and grassroots organizations throughout major cities, Chicago, Oakland, Miami, and just other different, New York, all over the place, New Jersey, where there are people who are very much committed to are anti-violence prevention people, and they are committed to preventing that type of, gun violence or just violence in their own communities. Hey, Joshua. Hey, Tiffany. Hey, sis. And I wanted to bring that up. And let me tell you where I'm going with this. I think it's important for us not to superhumanize our trauma and the things that we experience in our communities. I think that it's very, it's a script and it's a narrative that I don't believe is truthful, and I don't believe that it gives much context to what we, and when I say we, I'm talking about communities of color, have experienced for, centuries. Okay, and I think that this is important because if you think about some of the violence that just some of our great grandparents who were former slaves and things of that nature experienced, I think you really have to understand the level of violence that they at some point became accustomed to and also had to endure, and how that trauma and that violence passed on within that community for years, in addition to things and policies and discrimination and deprivation that is taking place in communities of color specifically. And hey, Monique. And I think it's important because I was sitting down talking with my mom, and she's closer to 70 now. And then my grandmother is in her 80s. And we were watching, I had already seen I'm Not Your Negro, but my mother hadn't seen it. So we were sitting down, we were watching that together. And she was just saying, gosh, the 60s was a tumultuous time. And I said, it kind of seems like that right now, doesn't it? And she was like, telling me, yeah. So she was looking at the film, and she was saying, I didn't realize that was that level of state violence even back then, And I said, well, how come? She said, probably because we didn't have a TV in our home. So there's a whole lot of information and things that are insulated within our communities back then. And I think a lot of that still takes place. And it's not because we don't have access to means to see it. I think it's the media in which they present it, which is why it's so important for us to really speak to, for ourselves in our own media in our own way, so that we can relay the information and the issues that are important to us. And and I also wanted to kind of talk about, if just for example, I think we were looking at that film, and it was a lot of hanging and lynching and things like that. Ida B. Wells, went under the anti-lynching, campaign, and that was her thing. And I think what we don't understand is to be exposed to that level of egregious violence in your communities, in our communities, and our great grandparents' communities, right? And to see people hung and burned and dragged, and this doesn't happen on a one type of incident. This is not even just a period of time. This happened for years, y'all. And the community, the African American community, the Black community, had to endure this without any course of being able to get any justice or being able to stop it. So you have generations of great grandparents, their grandparents, their kids, who endured and watched this level of trauma. Could you imagine the amount of anger, bitterness, some confusion, depression, that all is settled within our communities because nobody has had the access or understanding to the fact that that type of environment affects us to the core. And we are no different than any other race of people. We experience hurt, pain, trauma, mental health issues, depression, substance abuse issues. We experience all of those things, and you would think that given the history that we have come from, that we will probably be even more subject to these type of issues than any other race, at least within our, with the exception of the indigenous people. We would experience that level of trauma and PTSD and so on and forth. And I think we just don't really put that into context. And I think it's important because it helps to understand. I don't know how we would move forward if we haven't been able to address it and heal it. And if we put ourselves in a position where we do not at least give our pain and our trauma and the things that we experience in our community the necessary calling out, and the right to be able to have access to healing, and some way our communities be provided with the things that we need so that we are in situations where that magnetizes the level of trauma and violence that we commit on each other, because nobody is having an avenue for healing. Now, here's the thing. Some of us have been able to come out of that situation, and not everybody who has had that in their background will experience, in an instance where they're not able to be exposed to something else, or the generational curse, if you will, is broken. That isn't the case for everybody. But let me tell you, it's when it does happen, it allows for the person who's able to be exposed to something different and actually break that curse for their family and generations to go about things in a better way. It doesn't necessarily mean that you wouldn't experience discrimination or anything else. It just means that there's a way for you to basically be exposed, get better education, better access to healthcare, better opportunities for employment, be able to get out of situations where you are not basically trying to survive in order for you to make it. And a lot of our communities that has happened. And the idea is that when we make it, and I'll admit that I was one of those people that I was like, okay, so I mean, I worked hard, I got it, I did it, and not everything was easy for me. Why can't, how am I supposed to feel about anybody else who hasn't? And, I think that if we were to be honest, and I even seen this in that film, that there's certain parts of us in the middle class that completely forgot, where we come from, as well as how much our ancestors struggled, and that there's still people who are in the struggle, who are not necessarily in our position. And when you have the opportunity to lift as you climb, we ought to try our best to do it. And I know that some of us are doing that, so I'm not saying that we're not. I just think it's important that we really understand, from a historical standpoint, and I'm by no means a super, historian. That is not my background. I just like to learn, and so I just research a lot of this stuff, and I try to understand, and it honestly helps me be more compassionate about people that don't necessarily have access or exposure, or not. They don't necessarily have the opportunities that I was afforded as a Black woman, and I think that's something that we need to pay attention to. So on the topic of this term that people talk about, which is Black on Black crime, I think that we also, hey Pauline, my girl, y'all, Marissa Phillips, hey. Kevin Cook, awesome. All y'all people, I ain't see y'all. My bad, y'all. I be focusing on. I didn't see you, but thank you, Donnell Will. Thank you. But I wanted to bring it up because I don't want. Let me tell you what's important to me. I don't want us thinking that we are superhuman in the instance that we don't need the assistance and help for the things that we experience, which I would like to say that has been very horrific and has, continued to go on. So let me give you an example. So if you treat, because I've heard this term, treat violence like as a disease. And I remember when I first heard it, and I was like, I don't know how I feel about that. And let me tell you where I don't know that I have changed my mind, but it's evolved. So let me say this. when you look at disease, you look at the underlying symptoms, right? And so you look at what symptoms you're having, and you do a whole bunch of tests and different things, and then you determine, what in fact is your issue, and you don't go straight to the root. You have no way of knowing that. You have to do some underlying test results and things like that to get a better understanding of why, what it is that you have as far as an ailment is concerned. So when somebody said that, I said, okay, I understand that portion of it. I think what I got hung up in is the word disease, which is, technically has a negative connotation to it, because disease is not considered a good thing. But as I went on, I wanted to kind of just explore my understanding and really understand where they're coming from with that. And so I thought about the opioid crisis. We know in our communities that we've struggled with drugs like any other community. And not until the opioid crisis was deemed as a health crisis was it then treated as such. And I know we've all seen that and we've all heard it, but that's so very important, because what happens is that allows for people to not necessarily be criminalized for their substance abuse. That also allows for people who do engage in criminal behavior as a result of a substance abuse to then get help or seek help and even be covered under your insurance, so much so that you can go to a rehabilitation center. See, that is the difference between treating an issue like that, like a crisis, as opposed to how we demonize the things that take place in our community. And the reason why this is so important for us to talk about is because when we start talking about quote unquote black on black crime, which I don't like to use, crime is crime. But, when we experience it within our communities, as, that's the term some people use. But we just can't go to, we can't focus on police brutality right now because we're killing ourselves. Well, guess what? Everybody else is too. And I'm willing to bet you that you're not necessarily hearing about a lot of it. I could tell you about many of cases that took place from very prominent people in the communities, all the way up to the White House, and that was going on during my case. You heard nothing about it. Okay. So it happens, it's just not exposed. Okay. But I think that I bring that point because I think it's important for us to understand that whenever a behavior or some function within the community is awry or there's something that is wrong, depending on how it's addressed, will have a lot to do with how the public sees it and then goes about treating it. And I just got to believe that there's an opportunity for it to happen within our communities as well. If we have this level of violence and trauma within our communities, and we've seen it, we've seen it, some of us has experienced it. Could you imagine, for those who haven't, what it's like to lose it? You lose it and you have family that's traumatized and children that go parentless, and that affects the way their growth, because it's like their development is arrested. And so they're exposed to these type of things. They don't know how to feel about it. They're frustrated. They're angry. Some of them are bitter, don't necessarily know how to deal with things. So people act out, and that behavior is demonized or even criminalized. And so a hurt person then goes on to hurt other people. I think this is important because I'm willing to bet, I'm so sure about this, that I'm willing to bet that there's not anybody who was 5 or 6 and was like, you know what, little Marissa, what are you going to be when you grow up? You know what, I think I'm going to kill me a couple people when I get 17. I'll probably do some carjacking by the time I'm 14. Yeah, that's pretty much what I'm going to do. And if I can't work that out, I guess I'll just be a rapper. I refuse to believe that's the case. We can't believe that. Something happens along the way. And a lot of us aren't talking about those things. We don't even know how to. We're not even given the freedom to. We don't even have the access to the health care piece of that, mental therapy, to even work through those issues. We have a lot of kids who are exposed to violation. They can't tell their family members. They're being consistently violated. Sexual abuse or molestation, that also arrests your development, and different people deal with that differently. Some people are more promiscuous. Some people withdraw and become angry and violent. There's a list of things I think we need to make sure that when we start talking about black on black crime, and we like, wait a minute, that was the end result what was the root of that? Like, what went on in a person's development and growth and evolution that hurt them so that, took away their innocence, made them feel violated, or in fact they were violated. Their security was uprooted, loss of parents, foster home. All of these things is very, very important for us to think about when we start talking about black on black crime. And the reason why it's so important, because we know historically, economically wise, we don't get what we need in order for us to be able to rise above those things. And so what we end up having is just this cycle of violence and dysfunction, where we've normalized this in our communities and in our homes and in our, in our single homes and in our schools and the peers we're around, and it's almost like it's normal, and it's not. And then we compare it to something completely out of the ordinary, and it's not right. And I can assure you that it's not that these areas have more crime than any other ones. It's just that they're looking for it. You're going to find it. If we went into other communities, I'm pretty sure we would find them. Now, it may not necessarily look the same, but we will find it. And so I think it was important for me to talk about that, because I hear, a lot of people who talk about, I've heard the term. I've heard a lot of people be very frustrated lately. Kids, innocent bystanders, having nothing to do with situations and being, caught in the crossfires of community violence. And it does not take away from what we expect our state and our law enforcement to do. We also have the opportunity to recognize that when we have issues like this within our communities, we're paying taxes already. We're already asking for people to say, hey, come in and, fund these programs that we do have. And I can guarantee you a lot of these people who are doing anti-violence work, they're putting most of their own money into it first. And it's almost as if not really, the state or whoever, the local council, is wanting them to do it for the longest without funding before they will fund it. And that's not right, because we know a lot of us who are in the work has been doing it for a while, know what needs to be done, knows where the issues are. And when you start thinking about, really, y'all hear that? It's 7:26 of the 8th of July, and there is fireworks that's just messing up my business. See, that ain't nothing but the devil. That ain't nothing but the devil, but I'm going to finish what I was saying, and I'm going to end it short. That's okay. They are in there. They are doing the programs already, and I apologize, y'all. I don't know where that comes from, but we're going to get back to our regular schedule program. Hope it didn't scare you, because it did me. But they are already doing the work. So this week, the Department of Justice gave another $22 million towards law enforcement. I'll post the email. I'm actually plugging in there because I be wanting to know what they got going on. So it's another $22 million grant that's gone to law enforcement for several different programs. And none of them really nothing really about anti-violence. There was some training and things like that. And I just thought to myself, hey, listen, that's a part of defunding and reallocating those funds that people are talking about when they're talking about defunding the police. But yet we got another $22 million grant given to police counties or police stations all across the country. So I'll put that in the email. There's also a good book that'll reference some of these things that I spoke about today. And I really didn't put much of their information in this video. I wanted to kind of summarize my feelings and then point you to what I use as a reference just for something for you to look at. So there's a book called Bleeding Out, and it talks about the devastating consequences of urban violence and a bold new plan for peace in the streets. Now, this guy is a Harvard, grad teacher or something of that nature, but I can assure you that people in our communities who are on the ground don't need this book to reference. all this book does is just solidify what they've already been doing. But I believe that if we can spend more energy uplifting and highlighting those grassroots efforts that are already taking place in our communities, and then taking the model that they use and using it across the countries, and then demanding from our local city officials a budget that, again, removes some of that funding from the police department and actually funnel it to things that would be helpful towards anti-violence. I think that's the way that we really should go, and really start getting honest about what we are dealing with within our communities, which is a roadblock to people being able to see themselves out of poverty, see themselves out of the lack of health care, the lack of mental health, the help, the lack of being able to go to rehabilitation for drug and substances abuse that come from coping mechanism for the trauma, the pain, and the violence and things that they've experienced within their own life. So I think this is important, because I don't hear us getting to really talk about that. And I know this comes from me going, I did some time with women, and I seen a lot of them and talked to them about their background. And I was like, oh, okay. And I was just fortunate that I had the mother that I had, and have to this day. She's still alive, and the support that I do have. And what I realized was that if it was me in that environment, it would have been the same thing. And had they had mine, maybe it would have been a different outcome. So I just wanted to share that with y'all. Hopefully y'all stayed on with me. One of them people was just telling y'all, man, you gotta love folks. Well, our folks be doing the most with the least, don't we? So they sweeping it up now. It's all done. Again, I want to thank y'all for tuning in. I appreciate all your comments and everything. Paul Davis, the powers that be refuse to fund programs that could possibly level the playing field. Well, we outnumber them. So what we have to do is get people that we know are going to run and who are going to speak to our issues, and we start supporting those candidates now, in addition to doing the work that we can do already. Because what happens is it's like time to qualify, and then somebody pops up, and they're not looking to really work to get elected. They just want to get some name recognition, and that's not doing us any good. And the last thing I'll say before I get off, we don't necessarily want to just holler. We want representation in this part of the government and this and in these companies, and we want people in these executive levels that are black. Because what will happen is we quite possibly will get a Ben Carson. And I don't think we want him. Darn sure don't want Candace Owens. Oh, skin folk ain't your kinfolk. So we don't want those people in these positions. So we really need to start thinking about, at a grassroots level, who can represent you in terms of, if you want that leadership, and then start really marketing and making sure that we get the people that we want to get in those positions. And then we just mobilize that power from there. Just one thing to think about. I don't have all the answers, just stuff I be thinking about sometimes. But that's all I got for today. Thank y'all for tuning in. I'm sorry for that. Y'all have a good day. Peace out.